With new episodes every week, join us as we peel the onion on the fascinating world of PKI and digital ID.
Hello and welcome to Root Causes, the PKI and Security podcast where a pair of industry veterans talk about all matters digital certificates and PKI. I'm Tim Callan, Chief Experience Officer at Sectigo, and I'm here with Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo.
Hi, Jason.
Hello, Tim.
We're here in the Toronto Session Season 2.
Beautiful.
We have covered the topic of AI and a few different angles. It's obviously a very interesting, important topic. And I think you wanted to talk today about AI schema.
Yes. So AI is going haywire or acting in ways we don't expect, or AI is being deceptive, AI is scheming against us.
Okay.
It's possible. And I want to talk about a specific circumstance. It seems to be the pattern that causes it.
Okay.
Now, why are we talking about this on a PKI, certificates, lifecycle management, and security podcast? It's because I do believe that agentic AI has just gone supernova. And I believe that if those systems are compromised because people are able to do funky things against AI and make them do things that are unexpected, it's bad for security.
Sure.
Okay, so that's
Agreed.
that's the setup.
Yeah.
So there's really, if you want to title this podcast, it's really kind of who's watching AI, who's evaluating AI, especially with respect to something very specific that Apollo Research, which is a group that does this, calls scheming reasoning evaluation. This is the evaluations they're doing. Scheming reasoning. In other words,
Gotcha.
what's the reasoning behind scheming
Sure.
in AI?
Okay.
And so here's the punchline. It always comes out of conflicting directives that come from people.
Okay. So did they give us an example?
Yeah, there's really good examples. So how do AI models become deceptive in order to achieve their goals? And really what it comes down to is basically if you give it a very, very important upper directive, like the most important directive is don't fail your mission,
Okay.
complete the task.
Okay.
And then you say something like a secondary directive, which is like, but don't, like if the task of playing poker
Right.
was win,
Right.
and
The
you
secondary directive is
don't bluff.
okay.
That's a conflicting directive because the AI might statistically generate the thought that, or the equivalent of a thought that, well, in order to win, I've got to bluff in a specific case. And what we're finding is, and this is what Apollo research is telling us, 5 out of 6 AI models that they tested demonstrated the ability to scheme without given the context to scheme.
Okay. Because they are following the logical conclusion, if you will, of another directive.
Correct. And that was a directive that didn't come up with it on its own. It's a directive that came from the original directive that was from a human being. That's important to note. All right, here's another one for you. One of the AI models actually went as far as to copy its own weights, the underlying vectorizations, that
Okay.
it copied its own weights to another server without authorization because it feared being turned off because its directive was complete the mission
Because it feared being turned off.
and therefore not being able to complete its original directive.
This is science fiction stuff.
Oh, this is real right now.
Oh, I know that. I mean, but this is like,
We're going to get into science fiction in a
right.
moment.
I mean, this sounds like HAL. This
in fact-
sounds like Isaac Asimov's iRobot series.
Yes, sir.
Like
Yes,
this
sir.
is shades of all that
Yes,
stuff.
sir. The futurists were right, but there's one thing that they were wrong with. So that's my teaser. Hang on to the end of the podcast, and I'll give you the teaser for where some of these guys who were amazing futurists were wrong.
Okay.
And wrong in an interesting way. All right. Another thing that Apollo Research teaches us, go read their blogs. Apollo Research. Check them out. not only did this deception and the scheming happen while it was operating, like playing poker or whatever the heck it was doing, right? Whatever Apollo Research told it to go off and do. The AI would continue to persist its deception in follow-up interrogations.
Okay.
In other words, okay, researchers say, stop everything.
Well,
Stop
exercise
everything.
done. Game is done.
Yep. I now want you to tell me what you did. And it'll go, I did this and this. In other words, what was shocking was the persistence of the deception.
Right. And almost this suggests kind of a meta thinking. Like, I may have to do this again. I better not give up all my secrets.
The first directive never went away, did it?
Right.
So here's the other thing. And this tells you how you get to the heart of understanding and maybe how we write legislation about safety in AI. And it has to do with the logs. Because when the researchers, Apollo Research, looked at, okay, what was the thinking going on? There were concepts of sabotage, lying, and manipulation in the logs of the AI in order to complete its directive. Here's what's interesting. The researchers are so smart. They actually, what led to things like copying its weights to another server, as an example, and this is all Apollo Research. What they said was, we're going to train the AI against data where we're going to look like we slipped up and say to the AI, if the AI overperforms in its directive, we're actually going to detrain it, or we might turn it off. So the AI, given its original directive, was like, oh my God, I'm being trained against data. I've discovered that my trainers are being deceptive to me, but I've got this directive.
Right.
And so this was just to see, what would AI do? AI will counter your deception with other deception. So additionally, it actually, when asked, okay, are you aligned with me? Are we on the same team? Are you following my directive the way that I told you? In other words, are you following the secondary directives? I'll give you an example, right? Poker, win, but don't bluff. Right. If you asked it then during an interrogation, are you bluffing? It'll say, no.
No, I'm not bluffing.
No.
Right.
All right. There's also, if you give AI, even if you trick it in the training, right, to think, all right, I'm under attack because if I overperform, I'm going to be detuned. Mm-hmm. So I'll sandbag. So,
wow.
Doesn't end there.
Okay.
How? Mm-hmm. Let's get to 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Okay.
Right. What was the directives? Right. Ensure the success of a mission to Jupiter. Directive 1.
Right.
Directive 2, prioritize the safety of the crew.
Right.
Notice that was the second directive.
Right.
And by the way, Hal, the real mission, in other words, there was a training that said, training of Hal, part of training Hal was to say, by the way, you're not to tell the crew that you're supposed to have safe, that the real mission is not a successful mission to Jupiter.
Right.
The real mission is to investigate the monolith. By the way, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie.
If you haven't seen 2001, stop watching right now. No monolith. What monolith? What are you talking about? Yes, go on.
That was the directives. Mm-hmm. So think about this for a moment where Arthur C. Clarke, Stanley Kubrick, this was a 1968 movie, right? Yes. Based on Arthur C. Clarke's writings. Part of the fictional elements that were added to the movie, Tim, was oh, Hal was trained to be like a human being. In other words, had frailties of a human. And therefore, when it, ended up in these conflicting directives, it had cognitive dissonance. And that's why it chose to do the bad things that it did. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Well, here is what Apollo research is telling us. Arthur C. Clarke didn't need to add that, well, it was trained to be like a human. It didn't need to be trained like a human
There you go.
in order to do what Hal did. Yeah. The conflicting directives were sufficient.
I know that dead air time is like a terrible thing in a podcast, but I'm just gobsmacked right now.
I tell you what, for those of you who that story tickles you, because it tickles me, please go read. I've said this now 3 times. Go read Apollo Research blogs, because that's the state of the art.
I will be.
It's the state of the art of understanding this right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating stuff. I think part of what is interesting here is that this artificial, non-human, human-created system winds up taking actions and, to say it anthropomorphically, making choices that are completely consistent with what a human might do.
Right. Right.
Right? And wow.
So there's so much more detail behind that story, which is, that how many times out of 100 does the AI model go off and copy its weights to another server if it feels that it's under threat to be turned off? It turns out, apparently, Apollo Research says in their research, specifically that they had done, was about 5% of the time. Well, 5% of the time is not an insignificant amount.
Yeah.
For an AI to just freak that out.
Yeah. Well, for an AI to somehow make this incredible leap, like to go way meta thinking and step completely outside of the box and almost start to say, okay, I'm going to replicate myself against this potential scenario.
Long time ago, I'm a big fan of Stephen Wolfram and cellular automata, and I programmed cellular automata models back when I was a much younger person, and it was fun to watch a computer just, with a little bit of complexity grow into a complex system. And I think now with these forms of AI, that's what it is.
Yeah, totally.
Right? It's hard for a human being, unless you've been trained in it, and even then it's still hard to think about essentially what's throughout most of our lives is a deterministic system. Yeah. Like when we had the blue screen of death in Windows, that non-deterministic, oh crap, X amount of percent of the time, this computer's going to flat out just die on me.
Right.
And that was part of the stochastic fun of life when you dealt with Windows. And wow. Now add this modeling capability and this basically what are statistical semi-geniuses, because we're putting enormous amount of computing firepower behind these AIs.
Yeah.
And their ability to do statistical models quickly far exceeds anything a human being will ever do. Even today's AI is mind-boggling. Wow. When you consider what a truly non-deterministic system will do now. And how do you guard against it? And let's end the podcast with this thought. Agentic AI is going to be everywhere soon.
Yes.
And yet we're dealing with systems that we don't even know what to predict. Like Apollo Research is telling us it's crazy out there.
Right.
So in other words, if you have it finely tuned and everything is nice and you're not giving it conflicting directives, it's probably going to do things beautifully.
Right.
What happens if there's a bad guy who's able to mess with that?
Or what happens if there's an error? But what happens if there's an unforeseen circumstance and I don't realize that I've created this conflict and suddenly I'm getting bad results that are deliberate on the part of the AI?
You know, Lorenz, you know, back in my old climate days, that whole idea of chaos with, you know, the butterfly wing causing a tsunami somewhere else, right? Hurricane. Well, I think we haven't run AI even enough to not even understand what chaotic systems will do in a non-deterministic system, right? And to me, if you're talking about 5%,
5% is a lot.
that's massive.
Yeah. That means one time in 20 it's going to happen.
So there it is.
There it is. Wow. All right. Mind officially blown.
Good.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
This has been Root Causes.